Dad planned to marry his young girlfriend just weeks after my mom's death, threatening to kick me out. Am I the asshole for ruining his wedding? My father has always mistreated me badly. He was obviously not interested in being a dad from a very young age, but I never could find out which he disliked more, being married to my mother or father to me. Given that he treated my mother no better than he treated me, I believe he must have loathed it equally. I lost my mother only 4 weeks back. I turned 17 some months ago. It was not surprising. She had been battling lung cancer for some time and at last passed away in a hospital. 3 years ago she was diagnosed. Since then, it felt like I had been holding my breath. I believe I at last let it all go when Mom died. She was my friend, thus even now it feels quite strange to be without her around. She was most crucially the only person there to guard me from my father. Every single day in the house where I grew up, my parents would argue over something or another. They obviously did not love one another, and I really have no idea why they were married. My mother would tell me that they had loved each other at some time every time I asked her why she had married him. They would always make up, but I never could forgive my father as fast as my mother did. She had been urged to leave him several times as occasionally he would say extremely terrible things to her during a quarrel. He would say things like how he wishes she died from her illness so he could go on with his life and how he regretfully ever was with her and had a child with her. She just resisted when I advised her to go several times. I'm not sure why. Regarding myself, I had wanted to go from the age of 4 years old but had nowhere else to go and no other relatives either. Raised by her grandmother, who passed away while she was in college, my mother was an orphan who had lost her parents in an accident when she was small. She contacted no other family members, hence I knew nothing about my father's side of the family as he never took us to see them. He claimed not wanting us to see his family since he did not get along with them. There was no elaboration, and I asked him too, afraid. I was used to being screamed at for stuff, hence I wasn't going to paint a bullseye on myself by prying into anything like that. I had to deal with my father since, all told, my parents were the only family I had. My mother refused to go. I was heartbroken when she died, but my dad carried on as though nothing had happened. It was not shocking to me in the least since he had been acting the same way even when she was unwell. Knowing he did not love anyone, I did not expect him to be sensitive. He most likely lacked even that ability. What truly startled me though, was that my dad brought home a considerably younger woman once we were finished with the funeral and paperwork 2 weeks after my mother died. She was simply here one morning drinking coffee in our living room. My father told me she was my new mother when I plucked the bravery to ask her who she was. When he was telling me that, he apparently also had the largest smile on his face, probably his creepiest one yet. Against my will, I found myself remarking on it. Since it had only been 2 weeks since my mother died, I told him it was a little too soon to bring his girlfriend home. That brought me to a lecture from him on how this would be my stepmother in a few days and on the need of respecting her. He told me he didn't care that I had just lost my mother. I had to treat her the same way I had treated my own mother. He dropped another bombshell on me and informed me he was getting married as I was over myself with rage trying to argue with him. Ever since her diagnosis, he claimed, he had known that she would not be able to make it as she had always been delicate and frail ever since he had known her. He had thus begun searching for substitutes. That is exactly the word he used. For the past 2 years he had been with Melissa, his girlfriend. Now that my mother was at last out of the way, he told me he was planning to be married once more and ensure her death had no impact on his life at all. It at once made sense why he had been untouched by my mother's illness and death thus far. He had replaced her. I honestly just turned away from him because I was disgusted. I told him I would not be attending the wedding, and expected him to say he was good with it since, really, why would he care? Then he informed me I had to go, which caught me off guard. He informed me he could only make this look regular and acceptable to other people if I attended, so explaining why it was. He seemed to be saying that by showing up for the wedding, I would have accepted it and that since his own daughter had not objected to this marriage, nobody else would have any cause to remark on it either. Basically, he required me to be there so it would seem less depraved, which in and of itself was really crazy. To be honest, my father seemed insane. Besides saying such strange and pointless things, he was getting married 2 weeks after his wife died without thinking about what other people would say. Not only that, the woman marrying him was only 25 at most, a few years older than I am. Her actual age is unknown, however she cannot be older than that. My dad falls in late 40s. This man, who recently lost his wife to cancer and should be in mourning right now, is instead getting married and expecting his daughter to act like this is all normal and that she supports it. It is eerie enough. He definitely belongs in a straitjacket in a padded room. It's a complete formula for catastrophe. I told him there was no way I could be at this wedding when he informed me he was marrying Melissa. He was free to become offended at that as desired. Then he informed me he would not only be offended but also kicked me out should I miss a meeting. He would also ensure that I never got access to the college fund my mother and he had been saving for me ever since my birth. Since, as he had stated, my mom's money had gone into the education fund as well as his, so I considered it to be essentially unjust. Although I think I was entitled to it, sadly I couldn't make him turn over the money to me as it is not required by law. There were no records to support it, hence it was not as if he had set it aside especially for that purpose. Basically, I would be tossed out and would not have any chances of attending college either if I skipped that wedding. On one hand, I did not want to seem like I was part of this or that I was encouraging this craziness in any kind whatsoever, thus I was in a quite tough situation. However, I also had to look out for myself as I had a few months left before I left for college and I couldn't afford to lose money since I had none of my own. My mother's will takes some time to process, hence I would only obtain the inheritance only then. For now, it seemed as though my only choice was to show up for the wedding and present myself as helping my father. Last week I was informed about the wedding, but I just couldn't get myself to welcome it. I thus resolved that I had to go all out to prevent this from occurring. Or at least try to intervene. I told my father I would be at the wedding, but then I started searching for something, anything, to throw off the proceedings since I just couldn't bring myself to let this happen. I just wanted something. I really had no idea what I was looking for. When my father left his laptop alone, I got quite lucky, miraculously lucky. A few days back, he and Melissa went out to celebrate their marriage by dinner. I was alone at home. Leaving his laptop on the coffee table, my dad had since it was locked. I expected nothing when I opened it, therefore I just tried to guess the password. Fortunately, I got everything just perfect. Melissa's name came first, then his own birthday, which was strangely startling. Still, once I arrived, I could hardly believe it. I first found nothing when I started browsing his social media. Then I saw he had 2 Facebook profiles, and I chose to review the second one, which I had not seen before. Surprising me was his hidden account set up for his side of the family. He had been telling my mother and me he did not get along with his family, but here he was on his other page hanging out with individuals we had never seen before who seemed to be certainly linked to him. As I searched, additional pictures from years past turned up. He obviously has been in contact with his family all along. He had simply been fooling us. I then chose to review his communications on that account and discovered that he had been in contact with his parents for really a lengthy period. I guess he also carried another phone. From the start, he had been living essentially 2 lives, and nobody knew. Although my mother had known about some of this, she had never shared anything with me. Neither had my mother. I was rather sure his family knew nothing about me whatsoever. Following his talks with his father on his account, I discovered that his father believed he was living away from home for business only, nothing else. He had a full family here, little knowing of it. I snapped brief pictures of those conversations and turned to my own phone to talk to my grandfather. Given all of this was so absurd, I was really anxious about whether he would even believe me. I could hardly believe it myself. Still, I went to my room and signed in using my own Facebook account. I got in touch with the profile I saw on my dad's page. As I had predicted, there had been no mutual friends. So I had never been able to locate him. I had never been able to track these people as I hadn't even known my grandfather's true name for all these years. Having his account now, I messaged him straight away and tried to rapidly explain everything. This was an emergency, hence I provided him my phone number and advised him to get in touch as soon as he could. I included additional pictures of the screenshots I'd taken, outlining how I had tracked his profile. I also sent some pictures of me with my parents so he would know this was not a hoax directed on him. After not hearing anything for the following 12 hours, I nearly gave up hope. Maybe he had chosen not to react since he felt someone was pulling a practical joke on him. But I eventually got a call from my granddad when Dad was at work. I was simply lucky that he had phoned me before that and had not mentioned this to my father. Anyway, I answered my phone and told him what was happening as soon as he called. For the past 17 years, he informed me, he had been made to believe that my father was working elsewhere, that is, away from Iowa, where he was originally from. Apparently, my dad had a separate house and everything here, which is where my grandparents had lived whenever they paid him visits. He had also visited his son several times. About none of this, they had the least of knowledge. They had spent the last 12 hours trying to get over the shock of it all. At first this all seemed to them as a joke, but they came to recognize it was real when they viewed my mother in the family pictures I had emailed. Apparently, my father had told his parents he had broken up with my mother, so he had never told them about his marriage and the family he had. They disapproved of her 18 years ago, When my parents first began dating, he had informed my grandparents he had dumped her as they were quite clear they did not want my father to marry my mother. For the past 2 decades, it was the fiction he had been selling. Now he had at last been caught. My grandparents had not wanted my father to wed my mother for really serious reasons. It was because they accused my mother of being a gold digger and she had reportedly been trying to cheat on him. This was due in part to the first time my father had brought my mother home to see his parents. She had instantly targeted his older brother, a surgeon who clearly made more than my father. My uncle's refusal to keep his lips shut over something so significant led my grandparents to learn about it. My father had been asked to split up with my mother, but he had turned down their proposal. I believe it was because of me since, based on my calculations, my mother most likely already was pregnant by then. My parents were given an ultimatum. Either they would cut him off from their life or he would split up with my mother. They understood she was only with him for the money, hence cutting him off would drive my mother to leave him. Eventually, my dad told them he had split things off with my mother, although obviously he had not, as they remained together. And this is the reason I'm here. If my mother had really done such things, I wonder why they stayed together. This fundamentally altered my view of both my parents. Once I knew these things though, I told my grandparents how badly I was being treated and that I had nowhere else to rely on. But I was depending on them now that I knew they existed and wasn't as alone as I had first thought. I still would understand if they turned away from me. Thank goodness they decided to assist me. I was able to stop the wedding from taking place. Like his parents, I returned to my father's house also. 2 days ago they flew down here. Yesterday, I managed to slip them into the wedding. All of a sudden, we were honored guests. Our backyard was the venue for the wedding as just a small number of guests were expected to attend. It was supposed to be a modest and private ceremony. Only my father's colleagues and boss, a couple of his acquaintances, and that was it. He had obviously not invited his family. They had not even received invitations to his first marriage. But I arranged for their attendance at the second. I emailed my grandparents and informed them it was finally time for them to show up as I wanted to halt everything before the vows were taken. Melissa had walked down the aisle and everything. I slipped out right before the vows, and then it was my turn to walk down the aisle with my grandparents for the theatrical purposes of it all. My father's face dropped and Melissa seemed fairly perplexed as soon as he saw me walking down the aisle with his parents. Once I drew close to him, I declared that his parents now knew the truth, that I had at last exposed all his falsehoods. He could bid farewell to his inheritance since all was now coming to me rather than to him. Since I already had a place to live, people looking after me, and also my college fund, I no longer needed him either. Knowing he was a liar, I did not want to be with him, so he could do anything he pleased. I then left with my grandparents, and since then we have been staying in a hotel getting ready for our trip back. Since I haven't known these folks, my grandparents need a lot of catching up. Likewise, there is plenty to discuss about my parents. We haven't returned yet mainly because this morning my father finally got in touch with my grandfather and informed him that what he did was simply not proper. He had supposedly never allowed his parents to be happy and accused them of trying to control him all his life. Saying I just couldn't stand to see him happy with anyone else, he also accused me of trying to ruin him by showing up at the wedding like that. Since Melissa is now avoiding him and the wedding was clearly called off yesterday itself, immediately after we left, he is blaming all of us. I am therefore good with showing up for his second wedding with his parents and exposing him for lying. Update 1, the wedding call-off was 4 days ago. I decided not to answer my father. He does not deserve it. My grandparents agreed as well. He knows where to find us should he wish to communicate with us. We still occupy the hotel. We have provided him with the specifics. If he would want to talk with us, he could come see us and then we could have a personal conversation. But the kind of conversation we wish to conduct over the phone or via text is not this one. He still hasn't turned up yet, and just 3 days remain before I return to Iowa with my grandparents. They have a farm there, they're really wealthy, and I will be taken care of considerably better than I was here. They assured me that they would see to it that I could attend the college of my choosing and that I wouldn't have to suffer following this. Since we first met, my grandparents have been almost pampering me. I believe they are attempting to make up for lost time, which is rather lovely of them. Though they seem to love me a lot, they loathe my mother and subsequently my father as well. Update 2. My grandparents and I are meant to be leaving in 2 days. My father decided this morning to at last pay us a visit and speak with us. When they contacted me this morning, I was really taken aback to see him in my grandparents' hotel room, but I immediately recovered and vowed not to talk to him the whole time until he apologized. Clearly though, given someone like him, that is too much to demand. He was here just to discuss how unfair it was that my grandparents had opted to cut him off from their life and hand me all the wealth instead. He claimed to have already lost Melissa, my mother, and his wife as well. Things were already really terrible for him since I also wanted no more contact with him. To top it all, his close friends and colleagues, all the attendees of the wedding, are now acting strange with him. What transpired at the wedding has damaged his reputation. Hence he is thinking of leaving his employment. He believes he cannot operate in such a hostile environment. To put it plainly, he had kind of lost all he owned till a few days earlier. Then we showed him at the wedding, exposed him, and wrecked everything for him. The least we could do was let him inherit, something he had been striving for years. Otherwise, he would not have lied to all of us for so long in the first place. He started lying since he merely wanted everyone to be happy. After marrying my mother, he said he had intended to tell his parents the truth, but as time went on it became more embarrassing to bring up. He had to keep up his lies and arrange a complex double life. Since everyone, including his parents, was against his happiness, he asserted he was the victim. Now, knowing I would be taken care of anyway, he came here to claim what he felt due to him, the legacy. From the start, he had been hoping and fighting for this. It would be unfair to deny it for such a minor cause. The way he was behaving as the victim infuriated me already. I lost it totally when he declared he deserved the fortune. I screamed out at him before my grandparents could say anything, "If you really deserve that inheritance, then I also deserve to be treated like a human being for the past 17 years. He had never shown me any love, affection, or even the smallest of respect. 2 weeks after I lost my mother, he had genuinely threatened to kick me out and use my education fund for his own expenses if I opposed his marriage to his young girlfriend. It was only fair his parents took away anything he thought he deserved since he could not give me anything I deserved. My behavior startled him since I had never before stood up to him like that. But now, thanks to my grandparents, I no longer felt terrified of him. Usually when I was younger, this worked to shut me down. He tried to glare at me, but this time I wasn't going to be silent. Earlier, I would do that since I knew my mother wouldn't leave, probably for the same reason my father didn't cut off relations with his parents: money. Which upon her death, was ultimately futile. Her only advantage from living with him was passing away at a reputable hospital. My dad tried to yell at me when I refused to be quiet, but my grandparents told him it wasn't going to work anymore. My grandparents threatened to call security on him, thus after some conflict he had to leave. He wouldn't get anything unless he owned and accepted his mistakes. They were very plain. It would take a lot even then for them to pardon him. Had I chosen to keep the inheritance for myself, he would not have anything at all. Promising he would make sure we pay the price for what we had done, he fled like a toddler having a tantrum. What he believed he was doing is unknown to me. Though he most likely thought his actions would frighten us, it did not. It strengthened our conviction that, by not forgiving him, we were doing morally. He was not even remorseful, hence nothing could be forgiven. It gives me great pleasure to be leaving with my grandparents in a few days. I simply want to escape all of this. Although I will miss my buddies, it makes no difference now. Fall brings my trip to college. I just finished all of this. I graduated from high school. Update 3. Hi. So I left home 1 year ago. I haven't blogged anything for the previous few months since I have been really busy with college. I had essentially forgotten about it too. Following that battle with my dad in the hotel room, which I discussed in my last update, my grandparents and I headed off. We hardly spoke with my dad over the following 2 weeks, but I did run across a lot of members of his side of the family. I believe this family is the one I deserved all along. They all love me. Though she was too self-serving, my mother most likely attempted to love me. Ultimately, it damaged me more than it did her. My uncle assured me he would pay for my college tuition, therefore relieving me of any concern about it. That has been a great comfort. Though they had hardly known me for a few weeks, these folks had already resolved to show me all the affection I had been lacking for the past 17 years. For that, I am most grateful. A few months after moving in with my grandparents, I had to go to college, so I spent little time with them. My college is near where they reside, so on weekends I get to see them. There are no grievances regarding that. Not to apologize, but rather to remind me that I wrecked him and should feel bad. My father has tried to get in touch with me multiple times. He continues asking me to check on my grandparents to see whether he fits the inheritance. He emails and chats from several accounts but doesn't understand that being defensive won't support his cause. A sincere and honest apology would be the only thing that could assist him, yet at this time, it is too little, too late. I will simply ignore him. It is not worth it to reply to him. I lack the time or will to indulge his illusions. At last, I have the family I am due and am content with them. Right now, I'm loving my college life. So I will concentrate on the advantages in my life and attempt to forget about the past. I simply want to keep on improving personally. Thank you for watching. If you haven't subscribed yet, please do so and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more shocking real-life stories happening around you.